Hello, this is part 2 of the solution for owners who've got a PowaKaddy Legend cart that has a loose handle. I've put some of the parts down here that I mentioned in the first video, but I want to start with job 1. Job 1 is the chassis itself. When we look at the V in the chassis, we get questions from owners, why is it not a straight slot? And I want to demonstrate why when we enlarge the groove that's in this chassis, we cut it into a V. With these pliers or grips, as I tighten, you'll notice that the top section closes faster than the lower section. That is to make sure that it gets an even grip all the way up. If the groove you cut is parallel, the top section will touch, the bottom section will not, unless you make it enormously wide. We don't want to do that. I just want to make it clear again that this nylon here will wear with taking the handle in and out, the paint on the handle, and then the steel itself will start to get worn, particularly if some looseness develops here. The movement backwards and forwards is acting like a file. So that's job 1. Cut the little thin groove that you've got much wider, and if you want to check if you've done a good job, put your handle in, tighten up the clasp, and you should not see any part of this chassis section touching. There must be clear light between the two sides, just the same as when you put the handle in with the clasp on. When you tighten it up, you should never see a sight like that. That is a head clip, which is what we call this part, that cannot tighten up anymore. There gives you a better idea. A newer version, you can see there's a lot more room there to tighten that up before anything is going to touch. Right, I'm going to move this chassis out of the way for a second. Okay, we'll talk about the head clip itself now. When we buy a new one, a lot of the good new ones have much more room to start with, but you've got to understand that the nylon chassis and the paint on the handle will continue to wear away, and as it wears away, the job of this clasp has got to do more and more closing to effect a proper grip. So in the future, on a future service, we would grind away these two pointy sections here, which you'll often see, to make sure that it's got more capacity to close up. I'm showing this one here as well because it shows quite clearly the end of the thread, the stop. Now, when we have a situation where we're asking this clamp to tighten up more and more and more, what we do is we take the lever, which is this part, off, and we put pack washers, 1, 2, maybe even 3. That gives more capability, tightening this up further so that the clamp itself grips closer together without reaching the end of the thread. If you reach the end of the thread, you can't tighten it up anymore, and therefore the handle is not being held correctly. Now, what I'm trying to get across to owners when they come for service is that this is an ongoing situation. If you play a lot of golf, and I'm not going to mention time here, we've got some people at our golf club play 7 days a week. If you play a lot of golf, your cart will wear faster. You're also going to cause more wear if you take your cart through rough terrain, if when you're going along rutted pathways you don't do something to try and stop the bag that's on the cart swaying backwards and forwards. One of the tips I would give you is to push down on the operating handle, which lifts up the front wheel, and then the semi-pneumatic drive tyres can resist the shocks much more. So many owners that you see on the golf course, when you're walking along with them, their golf bag and cart is being shaken to death. That shaking will cause wear to many parts, not just this one here, but this one is critical. And if you're buying a new handle from the internet, from a PowaKaddy service centre, and you're not asking for any advice, I would suggest you look at why your handle is broken. You are replacing it, no doubt, because it's too loose. Now, to start with, buying a new handle will have some effect because it's thicker. It hasn't become worn down yet. but within a few months it will start to wear. And understand that when that wear starts, it will then rapidly increase because the handle is working backwards and forwards like a rotary file. And if you don't reduce the slackness in the handle tube and the thinness that is being created by this movement in the handle you've bought, you will then transfer the pressure down the handle to the one part that can resist the movement, and that's the centralisation groove that's in the bottom of the handle. Now, I mentioned earlier about carts we get back in, and here is a good example of one. We'll often see this when a cart comes in for service. The owner is totally unaware at the moment that they've got a crack in that. That crack has come about, let's imagine this is the centralisation post inside the chassis. This is how it fits over to centralise. But if I start to twist this way, all the pressure is going to be put on this one side of the V-groove. That will eventually become so much pressure that metal fatigue will start. Now understand, halfway up this handle is a bag rest. And that bag rest may have a 20 kilogram golf bag swaying backwards and forwards with momentum because the owner is not particularly careful. We can see here all the worn paint that I talked about, the wear. We can also see the wear of the lines. This is where it's coming up and down as you pull it out of the tube. So we have a considerable wear there, but this is steel. We're talking about a thin layer of paint. But nylon, which is what the socket that this goes into, will continue to wear and wear and wear. The only real solution, once you get to the point where you cannot adjust this any further, is you're going to have to buy a new chassis. So the best tip I can give you is start off with always having a good grip on this, and then your chassis will not wear and you will not need a new chassis. It's an expensive job, as I mentioned, replacing a chassis, and totally unnecessary. So let's consider what we're talking about here. It's a motor vehicle, electromechanical. It's going over rough ground through all manner of rough conditions, and it will have an awful lot of vibration. This means there must be, and here's the word, remedial. We call it servicing, but it's remedial work. It's taking up the wear that is naturally occurring. I know a lot of people like to blame products and they like to blame other people, but in this case you are the one who's neglecting, not other people. This is your cart. You have a duty of care, and if you don't think of a golf cart as being like a car, you would fail your MOT. Now in golf we don't have an MOT. You can go out there with a cart that's in a shocking state, but you've got to understand that sooner or later something's going to break, something's going to fail, and you're going to be let down on the golf course. Maybe it's one of the best rounds of golf you've ever had. It's a disaster, a cart breaking down on a golf course. I know, I've been a golf pro for 35 years. I know how bad it is, and you do not want that to happen. So winter time, if you're handy yourself, you can do some of this work, filing this away, cutting this away. It's not terribly difficult and it doesn't take very long. Putting pack washers on so you don't run out of thread isn't very clever. Making sure that a little check every now and again that this head clip is not touching. It's no more than checking the tyre pressures of your car. It's basic stuff that if you do the work, it will give you good life. The Legend cart, the classic cart before, were good carts despite some of the slightly poor design in the way this was done. I would have liked to have seen this been a square bar because it would have resisted the rotation, but we have what we have. The cart itself has been around for 30 odd years. You can't look back on a 30-year design and say it should have been done differently. 500,000 of these carts were sold. There's an awful lot of people still having the great pleasure using it on the golf course, but those people now are people who have had their cart serviced, or they're handy and they can do this work themselves. So I hope that helps. All I can say to you is this works. It isn't expensive. You have to do it. So over to you. Thank you.